There's a Supreme Court vacancy, it seems.
I think I saw something in the papers about that.
Did you hear about? Oh gosh, if you saw the headlines here in New York, I should grab one of the papers. Of course, once again, just because this is the way the news cycle works, this is a huge deal, which normally we would be only talking about this, but then we had the summit news. He is the swing vote here, sometimes siding with the conservative members of the court, sometimes siding with the more liberal members of the court. Just remind people about the impact of Justice Kennedy and, why he was considered the swing vote.
Because on some of the more important and lasting cultural changes that have gone on in this country in the last 20 or 30 years, specifically on the question of same-sex marriage, he was the deciding vote. He also was a deciding vote to reinforce by precedent most of the underlying Roe versus Wade decision in the early 70s that legalized access to abortion. Justice Kennedy was not in any way, shape, or form a reliably liberal voice on the court, but on some of these issues dealing with human dignity, basic human rights as defined culturally either in the same-sex marriage or abortion rights context, he tended to side with the four justices on the more liberal progressive side of those questions. But he was pretty reliably conservative on many other issues. So he was a swing constituent vote on some, and that's why his departure is viewed with alarm by those on the left, because they're afraid he will be replaced by someone who is a much more consistent conservative in the mold of Antonin Scalia or Judge Neil Gorsuch. And that will give President Trump and those who bring cases before the court a possibly more reliable, strict constructionist. That's one of the terms conservatives like to use about the court, meaning those who look at the original language of the Constitution, its so-called original intent, and base their justice and their decisions rather as justices on that original document. There are many in American jurisprudence who say, yes, that was a document, it was written clearly, but written a very long time ago. And America has evolved, not only economically, socially, politically, and that evolution has, at significant times, been not just appreciated by the court, but established in law through precedent by the court. And it's that continuum, that evolution, that those on the left say they want to protect. And they're fearful the absence of Justice Kennedy will make that ever more difficult.
And the president says that he's getting to work right away to find a replacement. And some of that work's sort of already done for him because he had to go through this process before with Neil Gorsuch. So he already has a short list. In fact, I think, a number of the people on his list he's interviewed before as he was deciding on who to pick when he picked Gorsuch. So let's talk about this short list. Who's on it? What are we hearing? And who are they more likely to be like? Are they more likely to be like Justice Kennedy or perhaps like Neil Gorsuch?
Oh, no, the president will try to pick someone much more like Neil Gorsuch, who he said would be much like Antonin Scalia. And he will use the counsel and advice of the Federalist Society in the person of Leonard Leo, who was on CBS this morning for an extensive interview, to guide him through that process. Now, our colleague Jan Crawford, all these names trip easily off her tongue. They're a little bit less conversant for me, so I'm going to have to read a couple of these names on the short list. But one of them clearly was on the list, is a favorite of conservatives, Brett Kavanaugh. He clerked for Justice Kennedy. He's sitting on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. That's the court right beneath the Supreme Court, very influential, very important. Anyone on that court is a likely nominee to the High Court. Thomas Hardiman, who was on the short list when Neil Gorsuch was selected and was interviewed by then President-elect Trump. He's a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Amy Coney Barrett, a recent addition to the U.S. Court of Appeals, Seventh Circuit. Raymond Ketteledge, Amil Tharpar, and Allison Eade. Those are all names thought to be on this short list. If I were to give you a semi-informed hunch right now, I would say Brett Kavanaugh has got to be near the top of that list. He's a favorite of conservatives. He is very young. He's gone through the confirmation process. It was contested then. All of those muscles have been freshly sort of exercised by the right and the left. And the president said in North Dakota last night, I want somebody on the court for 40 or 45 years. Well, Brett Kavanaugh, I don't know his exact age, but he's on the lower end of the youth spectrum for these potential nominees. And if the president wants to reshape the court for that long, someone like Brett Kavanaugh would fill the bill.
All right, so then keeping that in mind, Mitch McConnell, Majority Leader, says that he could see a vote happening by this fall. Does that timeline look reasonable?
Certainly. The Senate Majority Leader knows this issue, knows the process better than anyone, has reworked the process before the country's very eyes. He did so in 2016. As the Majority Leader saying it didn't matter who President Obama nominated. He said this before Merrick Garland was announced. Doesn't matter who the nominee is. That nominee won't get a hearing, and that nominee therefore won't have a confirmation vote. We're going to leave this issue to the presidential election. It was an enormous gamble. It had never been accomplished before. It generated massive controversy. Republicans stood with their Majority Leader. There was an election in November. Donald Trump won. He's invested with this power, used it once with Neil Gorsuch, invested with it now. We'll give a nominee to the Senate in short order, I predict. And the Senate Majority Leader, because he has all the procedural power to do it, will assign it to the Judiciary Committee. There'll be hearings, and I suspect a vote sometime in September, maybe late September, but it will happen before the midterm elections. Even though Democrats will say, 2016, Republicans said the people ought to have a choice in deciding this question.
Chuck Schumer said that it's the height of hypocrisy.
Right. But Mitch McConnell will say, different question. The question in 2016 was, to whom does the country invest the power to nominate? Not what is the composition of the Senate that is duly bound to confirm. He considers them distinctly different questions. State-by-state Senate races, not the same as a national election for president. And the investment of the power to nominate was what Mitch McConnell wanted to lay before the country, not the composition of the Senate, which is the question in 2018.
So
Democrats will not accept that answer, but that will be Mitch McConnell's answer.
So there really isn't much the Democrats can do at this point. There's no filibuster power. This is it. They're along for the ride.
They are along for the ride, but there's always a dimension of unpredictability in this. And the Kennedy retirement will obviously weigh upon Republican senators like Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, possibly others, knowing what is at stake. And if there is a nominee that comes from the Trump White House that they believe is too conservative, there might be some wobble there. We don't know yet. You have to take into account John McCain's ongoing treatment for cancer, for brain cancer, and the fact that he's not here in the Senate, which makes the margin even more narrow, 50-49 effectively. Lose one Republican or two, then this becomes a much more difficult proposition. So part of the decision-making process internally at the White House will not just be about who they want to nominate, but who they can nominate and be reliably convinced Republicans will stand unanimously behind. Any crack in that unanimity could create an opening for Democrats. So in this process going on right now, much of that will be sifted and weighed.
Yeah, I'm sure as we move forward, we'll break it all down with you. Major Garrett, thank you very much.
Sure.